Hello, 8th graders, and happy Tuesday to you. Today is Tuesday, March 23rd, and we are not going to be having a Zoom today. I will be offline and absent from work, so we are going to have this video instead. This will be your lesson for the day and include instructions for work time too. So please watch it closely and all the way through until the end. Of course, you can always rewatch as needed. Alrighty, so we just started our brand new unit, Changing the World with Words. And the main focus of this unit is going to be analyzing powerful speeches throughout history and today. Here are our three key questions of things that we are going to focus on. Number one, who is it that this person is trying to convince? So when we use the words target audience, that is what we are referring to. Who is it that this speaker is trying to convince? Number two, what is it that they want? What are their main goals that they are hoping to achieve? What kind of change are they hoping to see from their speaking? And number three, what current events are they referring to? Throughout history, when people give powerful speeches that actually change others' minds, we can't just listen to simply the words or read the words. We have to think about what's going on in society at that time. What are the current events and issues that are happening? Readers often analyze speeches to learn more about complex moments in history. Analyzing speeches from a certain historical time period or event is a really cool way to learn more about that time period in history or that event. Okay, we can read random facts about it from a textbook, but that's not going to have the same powerful emotion and meaning to it than listening to people speak about it. Usually, if there's a famous speech from a certain time period, it means that that speaker's words actually helped change people's minds and actually helped change the course of history. History is complex. There are moments of great conflict where people are at odds with each other. There's verbal conflict, physical conflict, and simply conflict in general. But when people give speeches, it really can create a lasting change. So today's focus is starting to analyze a long speech. We are going to break it up, though, into two halves. And this speech is by the famous Martin Luther King Jr. Now, you've probably heard his name before. You've probably seen his face before. He is a very influential figure. He was most famous during the 1950s and 60s as a civil rights activist during the civil rights movement. A lot of times when we hear his name associated with speeches, we think about his famous speech that he gave in this picture at the Lincoln Memorial. That speech was called, "I Have a Dream." That's a great speech, but that's not the one that we'll be analyzing today. Before we get into the speech for today, let's watch a quick video to remind ourselves about Martin Luther King Jr. and his life.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. Faith was always an important part of daily life, as both his father and grandfather were Baptist ministers. He thrived at a segregated high school, graduating at 15, before heading off to Morehouse College. He then dedicated 3 years to theological study at Crozier Seminary in Pennsylvania. While earning his graduate degree at Boston University, he met Coretta Scott, who he would marry and have 4 children with. King and his family settled in Montgomery, Alabama, when he became the 20th pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. When Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to relinquish her seat to a white man on a Montgomery City bus in 1955, the incident lit a fire under the burgeoning civil rights movement.
His boycott of the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama was tremendously successful because he was incredibly strategic and he worked with other people to get the individuals in Montgomery, Alabama to understand that they weren't going to take it anymore.
King's experience, passion for the cause, and position in the community gave him the credentials to become a leader in the 381-day boycott of the city buses. On December 20th, 1956, the Supreme Court ruled segregated buses to be unconstitutional. This was a major victory for the civil rights cause and proved King's nonviolent methods of protest could yield results. King was now the national face of the civil rights cause. He was jailed over 20 times, was once stabbed in the chest, his house was bombed, and he suffered relentless personal attacks on himself and his family. For a man of peaceful intentions, he unfortunately spent much of his life the target of violent intent, yet the threats never stopped him.
Dr. King inspired thousands of people through his eloquence and through his fearlessness, especially after his home was firebombed with his wife and his children. They showed through their courage that they were prepared to give their lives to the cause of freedom.
King worked tirelessly to promote the cause he so strongly believed in, and from 1957 through 1968, he traveled over 6 million miles, delivered 2,500 speeches, wrote 5 books, and dozens of articles. His hard work and ability to communicate earned him such respect that he earned the ear of President John F. Kennedy, who personally met with King. Of all the speeches King delivered, none has stood the test of time like his famous I Have a Dream speech. Symbolically delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, in front of 250,000 people, both black and white. King had become such a force in America that he was named Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1963. A nice achievement indeed, but it paled in comparison when in 1964 he became the youngest man ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
Martin Luther King Jr. was an American. He was deeply American. And what's striking to me is that he had more confidence and faith in American democracy, in the Constitution, and in the principles of fairness and opportunity than nearly all of his critics.
While in Memphis to lead a protest march defending the rights of striking garbage workers in April of 1968, King delivered a rousing speech titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." It would be his last. Standing on the balcony of his second-floor room at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, King was shot and killed. In 1983, Ronald Reagan signed a proclamation declaring the third Monday of every January Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a public holiday to celebrate the man and what he stood for.
All right. So hopefully that gave you a little bit more of a review of how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Influenced others. So this is a quote by him that I think is really appropriate for the speech we're going to listen to. Only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. So thinking about, really dark moments in our history and moments of great conflict, and people speaking out and rising up and advocating for change can be the stars in those situations. So you heard this referenced in the video, Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speech. It happened on April 3rd of 1968. It was at a crowded church in Memphis, Tennessee. He did die the next day. He was assassinated. He had been fighting for years. This was actually towards the end of his career, and he was definitely feeling the exhaustion and feeling the struggle of all of these years of hard work for advocating for civil rights. The speech is called I Have Been to the Mountaintop. In this morning's class, we are going to listen and watch the first half only. It's a longer speech, so we're splitting it up into 2 sections. Okay, the afternoon will then focus on the second half of the speech. So breaking it up into the two different work times. If you are in hour 6, you will do the first half of class with the first half and then move on to the second half all in one swoop, since you have one long class today instead of 2 different sessions. All right, let's go into Schoology and preview what you got to do. So in the day 1 folder, week 2, day 1, it's Tuesday, 3/23. There are instructions for today's activity. During our Zoom lesson today, we reviewed who Martin Luther King Jr. was and the impact he had on history. He helped lead the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s to fight for equal rights for all citizens regardless of their skin color. He led marches, organized rallies, and gave many powerful speeches to speak out against racism and injustice. So, to start with the first half of the final speech, there is a link to the video right here. There's also a link to the written speech. It will be good to have both of these open so that you can have the written text to find evidence, but that you also can have his voice and the image of him in the video. So when you click on the link to the speech here, okay, as you can see, it's about 19.5 minutes, which is why we're splitting it up into 2. When you click on the written speech doc, it will open up the full text of the speech in a Google Doc for you. Alrighty. For your work time today, as you listen and watch the first half of the speech, you are going to be adding focus notes to a page of notes that looks like this. So there is an essential question at the top. How did Martin Luther King's speech influence change? The date is 3/23 of 21. The title is I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. And then you will have 2 columns here. On the left-hand column, you will have evidence, details, and a quote from the speech. So you will pick out a piece of evidence, a detail, or a quote from the speech. And on the right-hand side, you will write down your reactions, questions, or connections to that moment that you pulled out here. These do not all need to be direct quotes from the speech. You can paraphrase a certain idea that he talked about as well. Alrighty, so let's review how we get started with work time. You will need to take out a piece of notebook paper so that you can set up your 2 columns. Keep in mind that you're probably going to want to have your left-hand column be a little bit skinnier than your right-hand column so that you have more space to write your reactions, questions, and connections. Okay, once you have the top of your page set up and your 2 columns, then you are able to open up the speech, view and read the first half, and be taking notes as you go. I would recommend that you do a few minutes at a time, stop and take some notes, and then continue on. If you have any questions, please email me. I can't promise that I'll give you an email during our class time, but I will get to your email this evening as soon as I can, and I will get back to you. All right, happy speech viewing and reading, happy note taking, and we will talk soon. Thanks.